Greetings everybody, and welcome to Music Matters. I'm your host, Jennifer Nicole Campbell. On the show, we like to engage individuals in our community who are passionate about the transformative power of music to bring meaning to our lives. I'm very grateful that today we have our wonderful guest, the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Mr. David Kim. David, welcome.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. And maybe you can just, everybody knows who the Philadelphia Orchestra is, but maybe they don't know about the history of the orchestra, so can you tell us a little bit about the orchestra?
Well, the orchestra is well over 100 years old, considered one of the great orchestras in the world. You know, most major cities have symphony orchestras, and many very, very old historic ones as well. But in the United States, there are what they call the mythical Big Five, and that's kind of unusual when you think about it. It's Cleveland, Chicago, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. And there are lots of other really wonderful, fantastic orchestras around the U.S., but we are considered one of the Big Five and have been for decades, and then also could be counted as one of the great orchestras in the world. So thus we do a lot of traveling and touring around the globe every season.
That's great. Now we have a great video that I want to show our audience of you talking about being the concertmaster, so we're going to show our audience that clip now.
Sounds great. A concertmaster has many, many roles to play in an orchestral institution like the Philadelphia Orchestra. My main job is to lead the first violins. An orchestra of about 100 people, you have the most of any instrument is the violins. You have about 32, 33 violins. My main purpose is to lead by example, to play and to show my colleagues in the violin section perhaps the color that we want to create on our instruments, the kind of playing that we want to do, the phrasing, because many times the violins are carrying the melody, carrying the tune. It's really important that a concertmaster can transmit a lot of information through non-verbal communication. Maybe the tilt of the head, maybe expression on my face, maybe the way I move my upper body. Many people associate concertmasters who know a little bit about the orchestral world. They think, oh, concertmaster has to be ready to step in at moment's notice. At this level, with one of the great orchestras, arguably one of the greatest orchestras in the world, the Philadelphia Orchestra, really nothing is going to go so wrong that the concertmaster has to save the day. That's really not going to happen. But there may be a juncture or corner in the music where things maybe are not quite lining up, or where the conductor is paying a little bit more attention to, say, the basses over on this side. And so his kind of back is turned to us. And we might have the melody. Well, at that point, I might see that point in the music. We're not quite matching up with the woodwinds. The conductor's back is turned to us a bit, and at that point, maybe we do need a little bit of rhythmic stability. At that point, I might kind of turn my head just a little bit, just to remind people, oh, hey, heads up, everybody, heads up. It's very subtle, this kind of nonverbal communication. Some of the other main or important roles that a concertmaster has to play, the conductor is the unquestioned leader of the orchestra. He or she conducts and shows the members of the orchestra the type of interpretation that he wants of that piece, he or she wants from that piece of music. However, the concertmaster can kind of act as you could call it a liaison, a translator. So I will watch what the conductor is trying to transmit to the orchestra, and I will try to read the conductor's mind and transmit that to my colleagues, again, through nonverbal communication. Also, a concertmaster has to represent the orchestra in front of the public. Conductors come in and out, they're traveling all over the world, they have many roles to fill as well. So a concertmaster, in some cases, can also be the face of the orchestra in the press, in public, social media. I can speak for the orchestra. In a nutshell, that is really the main duty of a concertmaster, and that is to represent the membership of the orchestra. So the first thing the conductor does when they come on stage for a concert is they walk on stage and they shake my hand. Now, the maestro is not shaking my hand personally only. He is symbolically shaking hands with the entire orchestra through me.
Well, that was a wonderful video, David. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I really like what you said about how, when you shake the conductor's hand, that you're kind of the orchestra's representative. I hadn't really thought much about that because you've been there through many different conductors. And so let's talk a little bit about how did you even end up in this esteemed role? I mean, this is pretty amazing to be concertmaster of this amazing global orchestra. So maybe you can tell us about your journey to that role.
Well, to be a member of any major orchestra, you have to basically go through a competition. Each position is filled through a worldwide audition, and word goes out through trade newspapers and websites and everything. And then we basically take in hundreds of applications from around the world with resumes. And the first stage is we go through all of them, just reading the bios and resumes, and inviting some and discouraging others. We cannot, by law, prohibit anybody from coming to audition.
Wow.
But we can kind of say, well, based on your perhaps lack of experience, maybe it's somebody who's still in college or conservatory. But those that are obviously qualified, perhaps maybe somebody from a different orchestra, somebody who's in grad school who's studying the orchestral repertoire, we invite them. And so from maybe, say, 350 or 400 applications, we'll narrow it down to around 100 that are invited, and then from those, maybe about 70 or 80 will show up.
Okay.
And over about 3 or 4 days, we spend it in the Kimmel Center. There are 4 rounds. The first 2 rounds are done behind a screen that is kind of looks like this, but it's cloth. And the members of the jury, 14 members of the orchestra, of varying instruments are behind there, and the players come out on stage, and there's even a carpet from the backstage door that goes to the center of the stage in order to prevent us from hearing heavy footsteps for a man, light footsteps, heels for a woman. We can't tell anything. It's completely anonymous. They're not allowed to speak or even make a sound. And then they play, and then we advance them, and then eventually, usually for the pre-finals, the 3rd round, we take the screen down, we read their resumes, and usually by that time it might be 4 or 5 candidates left. And then we have what they call the super finals. And then if we can't make a decision at that point, let's say it's down to 2 people, we might even do a trial period, have them come back in a couple of weeks, play several concerts with the orchestra, and then we kind of evaluate how they do on the job, in the hot seat. And so that's how every position is filled in the orchestra, including mine 22 years ago. And I was in the Dallas Symphony as associate concertmaster for 1 season before then. And Philly had been looking for about 2 years for a successor to my predecessor. And so I was very fortunate. I consider it the most incredible, besides being a husband and a father, I think it's the greatest gift I've ever been given, is to occupy this seat for, it's now been 22 years, so
wow.
God only knows how many more. Give me some wood.
Well, that's amazing. That's the whole process. You think of, God, 300, over that many people to narrow it down, that must take a lot of discernment,
You know, you'd be surprised.
Really?
I coach a lot of people who come from all over the world for coaching with me to kind of figure out the kind of language of auditions.
Interesting.
It's not quite the same as getting in front of an audience, smiling and finding that kind of communication and all that. It's kind of, it's a different language. You have to kind of toe the line, figure out how clean to be behind the screen, because even though it doesn't affect the sound really, psychologically, orally, it affects us. It creates a barrier. So you have to somehow project warmth and personality through the screen. And yet you do have to be clean, because we are kind of evaluating as we listen. And if we hear, say, a big flub, well, it might give us pause.
Right.
But if we love your personality and playing, and overall there's so much to love, we are quick to forgive and overlook and make excuses on the behalf of the candidate. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's a very interesting process. And yeah, I enjoy coaching people from all over the country and the world who come, and basically the first question is, well, what are you guys looking for? And usually I just say something like, well, the first thing we're looking for is not necessarily who operates the violin the best,
Yeah.
but we're looking for a great musician,
Right.
a wonderful musician who, of course, can play the instrument really well, but we're really looking for a fantastic musician with great personality. It's like a great wine. It's not just one grape. You combine many different varieties of grapes to create a complex product.
That's
And
great.
that's the same thing with an orchestra. We need to have different personalities, strong personality, extroverts, introverts, all different kinds. And that's what makes a great orchestra.
I love the wine metaphor. That's great. Now, you were a child prodigy, correct?
That's what they say.
So what was that? I know that sometimes we hear about child prodigies, they burn out at a certain point, but it seems to me that your trajectory came from child prodigy to concertmaster, Philadelphia Orchestra. How was your journey? How did you grow from that child prodigy to you trained at conservatory? Tell us a little bit about your journey towards being concertmaster, maybe.
Well, it was a very intense childhood. You can imagine my mother was a musician, a professional musician, a concert pianist in her native Korea, and then came to this country to continue her studies, beginning with master's degree and then PhD. And when she became pregnant with me, before I was even born, she decided, okay, I know what the destiny of this child is going to be. Not knowing the gender, she said, I'm going to have one child, it's going to be a son, and that son is going to be a world-famous concert violinist.
Wow.
And so when I turned 3, Santa Claus brought me a 1/8 size violin, and it was the beginning of a long, long, arduous journey. And it was kind of as though the words foregone conclusion were always in the background. It was kind of like, oh yeah, David is going to not learn how to ride a bike, not learn how to swim, not really ever open a book, crack a book. All he's going to do is play the violin great. And from there, everything else will take care of itself. Somebody else can balance the checkbook. Somebody else can, pay the bills. And, for better or for worse. But a lot of us in the music business have stories like this where the parents, especially immigrant parents, are just driven, and they don't understand that there is collateral damage to be had psychologically, long-term damage. And I don't say that lightly, but as now a parent, I have 2 daughters who are 19 and 20. My wife led the same type of childhood playing golf in Ohio, became an All-American golfer, almost a professional, Korean immigrant parents, driven. It's been a long road, but I wouldn't have changed it and traded it for the world, because I would never have made it to this incredible position without all of that sacrifice on behalf of me, by my parents, by my teachers, by everybody. And that transition from child prodigy to professional perhaps was not as arduous as the journey I've been taking as an adult once I'm in the position and trying to be a mature, productive member of an orchestra and society.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot to think about.
Heavy, huh?
Yeah. Well, now kind of pivoting towards, I'm just thinking about, musicians, how they're feeling today over the past 10 months, right? And
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't had many performance opportunities and things like that. I know myself, I'm a little anxious about the next time I perform in public. And so I'm just wondering, what has it been like for you and I guess the orchestra the past 10 months? Have you had performance opportunities? I'm sure our listeners are curious to know, what's that like? What's it been like?
Well, the Philadelphia Orchestra stays incredibly relevant and busy behind the scenes. There's Zoom calls happening throughout the day, every day at our administrative offices with our conductor, Yannick Nézès, again, probably the most dynamic, sought-after conductor, young conductor in the world. And we all know that this too shall pass, this whole pandemic, and that before we know it, we have to get back and continue to perform. So even as we speak right now, with just the early stages of the vaccine rollout, we're already starting to plan for the next international tour, for subscription weeks in subsequent months, perhaps starting next summer. We're not sure, but everything is kind of a little shaky, up in the air, because we're not quite sure of the speed of the efficacy of the vaccine. But we're hoping that by May or June, when the weather is beautiful, we can go back outdoors. And that's how we began the pandemic last spring and into the summer. A lot of outdoor capturing of video footage so we could stream it. But at that point, we had no idea how long this was all going to last. And so there we were. We were at the Mann Center in Fairmount Park, and we were recording live. And yeah, so we're doing that periodically. Every few weeks we get together and record an enormous amount of repertoire with international soloists, Yannick Nézet-Séguin conducting, other guest conductors. Basically the same stuff we do normally, but just into the camera.
Yeah.
And every week, every other week, there's new material being streamed, and people buy very affordable tickets and enjoy us online. And we've had millions of views from around the world through the pandemic, and continue to do so.
Yeah, well, I guess that's one benefit, right, is that you're able to reach a lot more people, you know, and people that might not be able to see the Philadelphia Orchestra otherwise from all over the world. And that's one good thing. And I love your optimism, David. It's one thing I really appreciate about you. I remember you said in an interview once, you said, "Oh, people say the future of classical music is grim." You said, "I don't think that." So where does that optimism come from? Because I feel like that's sometimes missing from our young musicians. Like, I'm hopeful about classical music. Where does that come from? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm on the backside of my career. I'm 57 years old. Who knows how long I'll be in the job, but hopefully I'll physically and mentally be able to handle it for, who knows, several more years. And I would say that, first of all, I think I was just born that way. I think I was just created that way, to be more of a glass half full type of person. But also I feel that I am the embodiment of good things happening somehow, inexplicably. And so I am certainly not the best violinist. I am certainly not the best concertmaster. I certainly don't deserve it. But somehow I am in this position with this incredible orchestra, and I feel like I'm on this amazing train ride. And this incredible orchestra train is going through history and making stops in Vienna and Tokyo and Moscow and just Carnegie Hall, and every week in Philadelphia, and people stopping me at IKEA and Trader Joe's and recognizing me. All these wonderful gifts that keep coming my way, even though I'm not the best at any of those things, is a sign that somehow somebody upstairs, I feel, is watching over. And music is so critical and so necessary. It's indispensable in our lives, beauty, art. And so there you go. You have the optimism just built in right there through my life.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. Of course, the title of the show is Music Matters, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. Now, it's I'm sure you did a lot of things at nursing homes too, and I used to go to nursing homes and play, and that's sorely missing, and I feel like our older generations are really suffering. And what are some ways that we can, still kind of be there for our older generations? Do you have any advice or some ways that we can engage them and get the music and that transformative power out there?
Well, absolutely. One of our traditions at the Philadelphia Orchestra is most Fridays our concerts are not at 8 o'clock in the evening. They are at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And that is, in general, heavily attended by older audience members. And so as I usually take the R5 down the train down into town, and then I walk from Suburban Station. I approach the Kimmel Center, and I see all of these vans parked around the block from retirement communities. And I play at almost every one of them every year. Some of them twice a year. I kind of almost have a concert series at some of these places, like Beaumont of Bryn Mawr, Waverly Heights in Gladwin, Dunwoody Village in Newtown Square. You know, just so many. I probably played about 20 different retirement communities year after year. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I started producing concerts in my living room with my daughter holding her iPhone and my pianist sending me a tape, and I would listen, and we would create these kind of concert videos, and I would basically kind of not only have music, but I would speak to them. I would give a little tour of my home, introduce them to my dog, you know, just anything personal and warmth and sending some love. Because, and I speak to my friends who live in these places, they are pretty much stuck in there for the moment, just for safety, and I totally get that. But being in a bubble is safe, but it's very lonely. And, you know, these places, they're full of art lovers, Philadelphia Orchestra lovers, music lovers. And I'm like a friend. I go every year and perform, and we have wine and crackers and cheese afterwards, and we visit, and we've all missed it a lot. And so I've created quite a few performances for, I just prepare it, and then my daughters help me, and then I email it directly to, say, Waverly Heights, and then their in-house tech people will create something and then broadcast it on their in-house television station. And so anybody can do that. If I can do it completely technologically helpless, if I can do it with the help of my daughters and just do it on an iPhone, certainly any musicians, most are much more capable, tech capable than I am. Anybody can do it, and they appreciate it so much.
Yeah, and I think it's probably this, you don't really see the after effects of it, but it's amazing that they have this opportunity that the concertmaster of Philadelphia Orchestra is, you know, in their living room, at least, if they can't get out. So that's, I'm sure they appreciate that. Now, I was thinking one of the, I think the last concerts you guys played, I remember watching, it was, you were playing to an empty audience. I guess it was back in March or April. I can't remember when I saw it. And I thought, I wonder what they're feeling playing to an empty audience. Like, what is that like, or what was that last experience like, you know, with playing to an empty audience? I'm just curious about that.
Well, there have been many moments from the beginning of the pandemic until today, mid-January, that stand out as memorable. But that was the beginning and the kind of almost genesis for us in the Philadelphia Orchestra, was that performance that you were talking about that was broadcast over Facebook Live. And tens of thousands of people were watching from all over the world. Actually, I think it was hundreds of thousands of people. And it felt so completely out of the ordinary for us. We're used to a full house, people within arm's reach. And it was, the air was heavy with emotion and concern. There was all, you know, the talk of masks and everything had not even begun yet. And there were just cameras, and we're this empty hall, and yet it was one of the most emotion-filled and high-energy performances in my career, and that I can remember the Philadelphia Orchestra doing. There was something just inside all of us. We somehow felt the gravity of the moment, and that we were perhaps doing something for the last time for a while. I think some of us were thinking, well, this might be a month or 2 months, or maybe this is just this week, and next weekend we'll be back. And we just had no idea. But certainly none of us thought, well, this is going to go on for maybe a year, year and a half. Oh, who would have thought that? Yeah. But it was an incredible moment, this Beethoven symphony, and I'll never forget it.
Wow. Well, so maybe let's pivot a little bit towards, you do a lot of teaching, David? Or do you have a lot of students that you teach right now online, or?
I do. My teaching career is kind of diverse. I travel to Georgia. There's a school down there called Mercer University, and there's a conservatory there for strings, the McDuffie Center for Strings, and it's really excellent. And I travel down there a few times a semester, and I teach a group of about 10 violinists there. They're all young professionals, and it's undergraduate only. We send them out to wonderful schools like Curtis and Juilliard and Yale and
Wow.
Michigan and Indiana after that. And then I do, I have one student at Harvard, and I teach her
Wow.
online. It's kind of a strange mix of teaching. And then sometimes I do master classes and workshops a lot, actually, for schools, conservatories. Like this weekend, I'll do one in person at the University of South Carolina.
Wonderful.
But then next week after that, I'll do one for Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that for many, many schools across the country. I've done some for some schools in Beijing. It's difficult, of course. It's 14-hour time difference. And so they're having to stay up all night, and here I am, fresh as a daisy.
That's great. Well, what is maybe you have some advice for young musicians right now that are looking forward to playing again in person, or just any advice you have for young musicians like myself, moving ahead to the next few months and looking ahead, hopefully positively, this next year?
I think it's very, very easy to become super over busy, in our pre-COVID lives and hopefully post-COVID lives, where we become so absorbed in the moment and just what we're doing. Now is a perfect time when we have so much more free time. We can kind of experiment. Now is a time to prepare for that inevitable restart and that incredible, like what I predict, my uneducated prediction is that the economy will also have this incredible surge after all this pent up waiting and restrictive life. I think that's going to happen in the arts as well. And so now is a time to prepare, whether it's technically on the violin or our instruments, to spend some time building a little bit more speed and agility and just doing some more etudes and exercises that we would normally not do during our busy times. And then perhaps thinking about making some connections, networking a little bit, trying to create some opportunities, whether they're small, medium, or large, and overwhelming and scary, and starting to spread out and prepare for post-COVID life so that we can hit the ground running when everything opens up again and say, you know what, I've got 4 things scheduled for whatever, September, and it's a good thing I practiced really hard. I'm in good shape. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I've got the opportunities. Let's go. Instead of, wow, I haven't played in a while. I'm a little rusty, feeling a little, come on, boys, let's go.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, on that note, I feel like I got to go practice now, David. But,
Do it, Jennifer.
Oh, my goodness. So, well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, David Kim. This is the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra. We thank him for being here. Again, this has been Music Matters. I'm your host, Jennifer Nicole Campbell. We'll see you next time.